Okay, Tony McQuail, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Adam.
Why don't we just start with you just introducing yourself. We were talking about you're trying to make yourself known as a national face, a national figure. So for people who do not know Tony McQuail, um, what can you tell them about who Tony McQuail is and why he's running to lead the NDP?
Sure. I'm a parent and a grandparent. I've been a farmer for over 50 years. I've been a New Democrat for 45 years. I first ran in 1980 when the liberals and conservatives were telling us we had to have high interest rates to fight inflation that was caused by a quadrupling and then another doubling of energy prices. And that was just pure nonsense. It was basically a way to transfer money from homeowners, farmers, and small businesses to the elite 1%. Because in addition now to having to deal with high energy prices, which was very inflationary, we had to deal with high interest rates, which was very inflationary. But they told us we needed to tighten our belts. And some people did it, a lot of people did it because they were getting thinner. A few people did it because they were getting fatter. And a few people did it with their belts around their necks because they couldn't take losing their farms or their
Mm,
homes or their businesses, suicide. So it brought home to me that decisions made in Ottawa had a real impact on people in my community. And I got involved in the 1980 election because Ed Broadbent was the only person talking about a made in Canada interest rate policy. And that if you were going to fight inflation caused by high energy prices, you needed to do it by energy conservation, efficiency, and shifting away from the fossil fuels by
mm,
going to more renewables. Made sense to me then, makes sense to me now. And the reason I'm running is after the 2025 provincial Ontario election and the 2025 federal election, I felt I could either lie down in despair or get up and do something because I'm not hearing the people who are leading the country and are leading the province talk about the things that I think we desperately need to be talking about. Because as a farmer, I see the impact of an ecological collapse on the ground. And in the news, I see the symptoms of a social collapse, both around the world and in Canada. And it has to do with wealth inequity. It has to do with stupid decisions that don't understand that we live on a finite planet and you can't keep growing energy and resources and the pollution of the planet indefinitely without having real serious consequences. And those are coming home to roost now. Wildfires, floods, you know, the smoke that we've had to deal with from the fires in the boreal forest have been, coming home to us, even though we haven't lost homes in southern Ontario to wildfires yet. But we get a drought and we have enough corn and soybeans all dried out and starting to burn. We could have wildfires here. Personally, on our farm, I'm seeing basically a collapse in insect populations compared with what they were. And they're a very important part of the web of life, the food web that so many other creatures depend on.
mm-hmm.
So I'm very concerned. And I've been talking about 4 R's representation because we've got to deal with the first past the post system so it doesn't keep ordinary folks from being represented effectively in parliament. And it's kept us out since we got the vote after the First World War. um, there was the United Farmers, there was the Independent Labor, there was the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, NDP and Greens now never get represented to the degree to which people would like to support them. And what that then leads to is a situation where people start to vote strategically because they don't think you can win and they don't want to waste their vote. And then we've got over half the population that have given up on the political system because it's just serving the elites when you come right down to it. And
Right.
certainly this budget has that same stamp on it.
I want to talk about the budget in a sec, but just to revisit some of the things you're talking about and just looking at what happened to the party in April after the election and losing so many seats. Um, Clearly, I think there was a lot of strategery or strategic thinking on the part of a lot of voters. There were a lot of people who were very allergic to whatever Pierre Poilievre was selling and perhaps still is selling. Um, but just looking at it from the point of view of someone inside the party, where do you think party leadership went so wrong that it led to the result we got in April?
Well, I'm politics is a strange thing, and there are tides in politics. This was the Trump terror election. Okay. Uh, Doug Ford went a year early to capitalize on that terror, and then he's acting like a mini Trump. And so is Carney, if you look at his Bill C5 and Ford's Bill 5. I mean, they're just planning to run over environmental standards, indigenous rights, workers' rights, all these different things to move the economy forward. But from my perspective, what we need to be looking at is degrowth. We need to be thinking about how we stop expanding the destruction of the environment through this growth mantra. And it's a for the last 500 years, we've had a conquest of the planet under colonialism. In the last 100 years, we've had a conquest of the planet under a corporate capitalist consumerist ideology. And it is shredding the fabric of life on which we all depend. I don't know if you can see my cake chart in the background
I
there,
do see your cake
but one of
chart.
my favorite, well, one of my favorite, well, it's not mine really, it's Hazel Henderson. She's one of my favorite economists. And she said, I'm an economist, but I'm tired of pie charts. I want a cake chart. And she made a layer cake chart. And the bottom layer is nature. And the next layer is the community and the family. Next layer is the public sector. And the last layer is the private sector. And she said the really important thing to understand is every layer in a layer cake depends on all the layers below it.
Mm,
And in terms of our economic folks thinking about things, they only look at the top two layers because that's where money exchanges hands.
right.
So we are, in the interest of expanding that upper layer, we are destroying the bottom layers. We're fracturing families when we start cutting the services of healthcare and the basic public services that our whole society depends on. That's where you build a nation, is by spending on stuff that affects everybody across the country, not a few mega energy projects, which are taking us in exactly the wrong direction if our problem is that we're already consuming too much energy and too many resources.
But Tony, if I can chase that metaphor a bit further, I mean, there are some weirdos who will eat icing directly from the can too.
Oh yeah,
But but we don't build our society around them.
no, but really, let me take that metaphor one step further.
Okay.
When I started running, we were talking about multimillionaires. Now we're talking about multi-billionaires, over 70 in Canada. And my father was an accountant, Adam, and he told me two things that relate to this. He said, money is like manure. It does the most good when you spread it around.
Mm,
And he also told me that one of the problems with money is no matter how much you have, you can always want more. And we are in a situation where we have people who have lots of resources, lots of money, and yet they still feel they need more and still need to keep running this growth, capitalist, corporate, consumerist growth machine harder and faster. And we are destroying our place on this planet. The other thing there is people have a really hard time understanding the degree to which things have gotten out of line.
mm,
But if I told when you write million or billion, it's the difference between an M or a B. Big deal.
right.
If you write it out longhand, three zeros. But Adam, if I told you you had 1,000,000 seconds to live, you'd have 11 days.
Right.
But if I told you you had 1,000,000,000 seconds to live, you'd have 31 years.
Right.
So contrast 11 days to 31 years. That's the difference between a million and a billion. And we our system has been designed by economists who think concentrating wealth in a few hands is just what you have to do to make the system work. And we've got a tax system that's been supporting that as well. So we need a redistributive economy. So my four R's are representation, regeneration, because we have to heal the damage we've been doing to the earth. We can't just sit where we are or we're still going into trouble. Then redistribution, because we've got to create a distributive economy. And then finally, redesign, because we have to redesign how we do things so that we build more community, more sense of connection as people, and doing that using less resources, less energy. So we have to be caring and sharing rather than greedy and needy.
Hmm. I think a lot of people are probably attenuated to that message, especially about the tremendous wealth inequality, and yet. I was talking about this with Eve Engler last week. What we saw a big shift in the working class vote, not to the NDP, who are deeply concerned about these things, but to the conservatives, who have sort of traditionally been the party of Main Street, if not the corporate class. And so that's a pretty big job ahead of you, isn't it? Trying to not only get that message out, but also um, trying to win back people and people who used to support the NDP, but also people who, as you said, aren't politically engaged at all and perhaps have given up on that any political party is speaking to working class concerns.
Well, of course, it's a big issue, and part of the challenge is that um, both the liberals and the conservatives have been working for the elite ever since before Confederation, and certainly well after ordinary people got the vote. But they've kept control. The elite, through the liberals and conservatives, have kept control of the levers of government, and so people have every right to be pissed off at government because it is not really designed to serve them as it's currently functioning. And the conservatives have been very good at mobilizing that anger and getting it focused within the 99%. So, we'll blame new immigrants who come to Canada because they're taking our jobs. No, they're not. They're doing jobs that need to be done, whether it's in agriculture or in nursing homes or at the local corner store. They're not taking your job, folks. And if they're being underpaid by the companies and the corporations that employ them and creating an unfair leverage, then let's make the wage laws fair
Right.
so that they actually are paid and become a contributing, and they're contributors. They're, they're part of our society. And but if you can mobilize that kind of anger, and if you can divide us over language, French and English and other things, if you can divide us over our race and ethnicity, if you can divide us over our sexuality and have the 99 squabbling amongst themselves, then the 1% are happily up there holding the levers and just laughing all the way from the bank because that's where they got their money, as well as in the corporate structures that they own in the offshore tax havens that they utilize. But that's what we've got to do, is talk about how we really fix those things and not just talk about them the way the liberals do before elections and then go back to the same old afterwards. I mean, Justin Trudeau could have dealt with representation in 2015. He
Mm.
very cynically, and his directors very cynically, used it thousands of times during the election. Last, first past the post, we're going to fix this thing. And then very cynically said, nope, sorry. So that would be one of the first things I would want to address.
I would note he did express some regret about that earlier this
Yeah,
year.
boo hoo hoo. Really, what a shit of a
Yeah,
thing to say.
yeah,
No,
no,
oh,
for
oh, I'm
sure.
sorry. I'm sorry. He had his opportunity to do it, and he and his advisors and the elite that advise him have no desire for a functional democracy where everybody's able. But that's the important thing about democracy. If it asks is going to work, it will help us figure out our collective wisdom. I think we need liberals, and I think we need conservatives, and I think we need New Democrats and Greens and the Bloc Québécois, all at the table, all representing as they are voted for and supported by the public, and then we'll get our collective wisdom. But if we don't do that, then we're going to ping pong back and forth between the liberals and conservatives, and they basically deliver the same product, but they dress it up differently, and they take us on policy lurches to show that they're different,
Right.
and that's very wasteful.
Well, let me entertain a bit of a practical exercise here, which is, we had the federal budget passed this week. There was a lot of sturm und drang about, will it force a Christmas election? Let's say for a minute you are the current NDP leader. You are in the House. You have a caucus of 6 or 7 MPs. Gap of 2 or 3 MPs determines, whether the government stands or whether it falls. You get this budget as it was presented by Minister Champagne. Um, what do you do?
Well, what I do personally is I would have to vote against it.
Mm,
But one of the things your listeners have to understand, or your viewers need to understand, is if I was an elected representative for a particular riding, I would also have to be listening to what my constituents said because
right.
I'm there to represent them. And that was a very difficult position that I think a number of the currently elected New Democrats were in. Um, you know, certainly did not like the budget, felt it was going in the wrong direction, but also we're hearing from people is, we do not want a new election. And the problem with a new election just now, in terms of any kind of progressiveness, we lost Mike Morris in Kitchener Center. We lost Nikki Ashton. We lost all these people. If we had a proportional system
Right.
and people could have voted for what they wanted rather than out of fear of Polyev and going and strategically voting for Carney, this budget wouldn't be this budget, because there would have been enough progressive people in there that Carney wouldn't have had only a couple votes that he had to keep from happening. He would have had to make compromises with a much more progressive bunch of people in the parliament. But that's not what First Past the Post delivered. It almost, delivered a phony majority liberal government.
Mm.
But so, I have to understand the context in which things are happening. But for myself, I've been talking about 4 R's: representation, regeneration, redistribution, and redesign. This budget does nothing to make the Canadian Parliament a more democratic institution. Nothing in there about let's get a citizens' assembly to fix this mess. Regeneration, we're talking about pipelines and liquefied natural gas, big, not modular nuclear reactors, because they aren't small and they aren't modular. Never built one. We're talking about mining projects. And in the second tier, we're talking about industrial carbon capture by the same people who brought you the climate crisis. Those are not nation building projects. Those are corporate rewarding projects that will make a few corporations rich and a few workers in Canada rich, but they aren't going to build things across the nation the way a regenerative program that worked with municipalities and community groups across the country to identify things that they would like to do to regenerate an old mine or a old factory site, or regenerate and naturalize backyards and roadsides, or any number of things, or design a way of in their community to create a transportation system that let them use fewer cars and maybe do more ride sharing and make sure seniors got to places. And it's certainly not a redistributive budget. But let's give yacht owners a chance to buy a yacht with good grief. But no, we need, and one is cutting public services and cutting, transfer payments for healthcare and that sort of thing, cutting out billions for the people, is the opposite of a redistributive or a distributive budget or economy. And it isn't closing tax loopholes for offshore tax havens. It's not instituting a progressive wealth tax. None of that. So it doesn't meet that R. And in terms of redesign, it's the same old talking about growth and talking about stability. And we're stabilizing an inequitable system that's been making the rich richer ever since I got involved in politics 45 years ago. So personally, I would have to vote against it. If I were representing a constituency, I would also have to listen to what my constituents said.
Right.
And so the best I might be able to do, if they say, we don't want an election now, it's just going to be, even worse. The Liberals are just looking to get a phony majority, and the Conservatives are hoping they could do the same thing. So would we be better off? Would it really get rid of the budget, or would it just be exercise in further destruction of a potentially green and progressive voice? We lost so many progressive MPs, and and have bizarre situations where Kitchener Centre has a Conservative member of Parliament because of the way the vote split.
And also didn't split that badly. I think Mike Morris only lost by like a handful. It was less than 100. I don't remember the exact number.
No, he was very close, but because the Liberals ran and the NDP didn't run much of a campaign, but they ran enough that there was a name on the ballot.
Sure.
Mike's not. And, this is just the stupidity, insanity, cruelty of our First Past the Post system, is it has been denying people the representation they want ever since ordinary folks, women got the vote, and people who weren't rich, propertied men got the vote after the First World War. But we aren't getting representation, and we've got to fix that. And that's my first R. Because if we don't fix that, none of the rest of it is going to happen effectively. But the other thing I want to talk about is what I call my 4Ds. And the first is delusional thinking, which is what I see all the time from like Mark Carney's budget. The idea that you can keep growing on a finite planet. I took environmental studies at the University of Waterloo, and we knew you couldn't keep doing that 50 years ago.
Right.
Okay. But economists who can make money out of nothing, write you a loan and suddenly we've created spending power. Um, don't understand this. Hazel Henderson does with her cake chart, but that's delusional thinking. And to keep that system going, they want us all to be in denial that we have to make changes. They're certainly in denial that they have to make changes. And what that leads to is incredibly destructive actions and behavior. And as I say, we're shredding the life support system on the planet. But that's why I think we also need a D called degrowth. And there's this here's a book that might be of interest to some of your folk. It's called Less is
This is
More or
more. Yeah.
More is Less. And it talks about how degrowth could save the planet.
Mm.
Um, and so, we got to get serious about talking about this, and nobody wants to, because to say, oh, we don't have growth. Well, we've designed a friggin' system that requires 3% growth to not have a recession. Well, that's
Right.
cancer. That is cancer. I don't want a cell in my body to decide it has to grow exponentially. We don't need an economy that's got to grow exponentially. It's cancer on the planet. And we got to face that. And nobody's talking about it, which is part of why I'm running.
Right. And if people think you're sounding like a green candidate, one of the reasons is you care deeply about the environment, obviously, but you have also made it part of your platform to form some kind of formal alliance between the NDP and the Greens. I think a lot of people listening who are maybe not so ensconced in politics hear that and go, yeah, maybe that makes sense. But I also know members of the Green Party and members of the NDP who absolutely do not want
Hate each
to.
other.
I was trying to be diplomatic, but yeah, it's bold though, and
Yeah,
I'm curious.
I hear from some of them, but
Yeah,
by God, if you're on the Titanic, bickering with each other about how you're going to patch the hole
right,
because you don't necessarily like each other is not a smart thing to do. And we are on the Titanic right now in terms of ecosystem collapse. So if you really believe that we're in an emergency situation, don't worry about the things you dislike about each other or the things you disagree about in policy. Figure out what you can agree on, and then figure out how you can make that work, and then take it to the people by working on it well before an election and come up with a unified platform and policy. You'd have to do that if you want a minority government. So why not do it ahead of time so people have a clear choice? Don't run competing candidates, and let's get on with the real work of fixing the problems.
right,
Because right now, we're not even treading water. We're saying, give me some more growth weights to put on so I can drown faster. Like we are not in a good situation here. And, what I would say to Greens, and because the thing is, in my area, Adam, when
mm,
I go to a Bill 5 or a Bill C5 protest or a Greenbelt protest or a farmland expropriation thing, the people I meet there are disenchanted liberals who have given, or at least who think these are important things, conservatives who believe we need to conserve a future for our kids, and Green Party folks who think that, we need to protest this stuff. Well, let's stop protesting it and figure out how we can work together on it so that we actually make progress. I'm tired of protesting. I'm
mm,
tired of protesting my MP's office and my MPP's office. I think it's time to work together. And we don't have time to meld some new party, but I'm talking about a green progressive coalition that can make sense to the people who've stopped voting, can make sense to disenchanted liberals who said, Justin Trudeau, you just lied to us. There are got to be liberals in Alberta who are not very happy that we still
right,
have a first past the post system.
for
There
sure.
got to be conservatives in downtown Toronto who are also not very happy about that. We need to create something that works on behalf of the 99%. And politicians, in my opinion, have a responsibility to make that happen so that people have a clear choice and a third alternative to the business as usual corporate capitalist consumerist ideology of both the liberals and the conservative leadership. It may not be, the ordinary rank and file folk who end up voting for him out of the strategic or historic family traditions are not being well served by them. And healthcare is one of our wonderful things in Canada, and we are watching it being whittled away by those folks' choices. But it's the ideology of the leadership and the people who control the leadership in terms of the elite's control of the conservative and liberal parties.
Well, Tony, if people are feeling fired up by what you have to say and are interested in learning more, how can people engage with your campaign?
Well, our website is tonymcquailgreenprogressive.ca. It was initially started by a high school student who thought my message was important and good. And his life's gotten real busy. He's helping his grandmother and doing some other stuff. But we're trying to keep it up, get it more up to date. We're very much a grassroots, very frugal campaign. Um, I took the train to Ottawa for the CLC forum. We're organizing a ride share to get me to the Montreal leadership debate because we know that things are tight, and they're certainly tight for our campaign. But they can find more about the campaign there. We also have stuff being posted on Instagram and Twitter and other things, and they can find out, and they can hear my campaign launch if they go to the website. I think there's a link to the little Instagram video we did for that. But it's an unusual political campaign because I think I'm trying to be very clear with people and very honest with people. And we're small, but I think the ideas we're trying to bring out are very important, and that's what's attracted a number of people to the campaign. So we are a very multi-generational campaign with young people who actually know how all this social media stuff works, which is not me, babe. And some folks who also think it's important.
Well, we appreciate the grassroots people. They make the work work. So, Tony McQuail, we thank you for your time, and we will look forward to see what happens in March with the vote. Thank you so much.
Uh, well, there's a good chance, Adam, I may not get to March because the party has created pretty high hurdles with they've inflated the cost of being a leadership candidate by 330% from what it was in 2017. And they want the first 3 quarters of it before the new year. So people who were already tapped for political donations for a federal election are now being asked whether they can support leadership candidates. So unless a person already had a large following outside the NDP because of their social media presence nationally, it's really hard to raise the money. But if people are excited by what we're talking about, certainly welcome their support.
Good enough. Thank you so much.